of Franklin. This is Thursday, May the 11th, 2023. I'll begin the meeting with a roll call vote. Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Present.
Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Present.
Alderman Potts, let the record show that he's not here yet, and the chair votes present. So the second item on the agenda is consideration of approval of minutes from April 13th, 2023 Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Hope everyone's had a chance to look at those. Any corrections, deletions? If not, I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve.
Proper motions are a second.
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. Item number 2, consideration of draft resolution to approve the City of Franklin's cybersecurity plan as required by the Comptroller of the Treasury. Parker Jason. Parker.
That would be me. Yes, sir. So in 2022, the General Assembly passed an amendment to Tennessee Code Annotated that required water and sanitary sewer utilities to develop a cybersecurity plan. As we know, water sewer infrastructure is characterized as critical infrastructure, and documentation relative to it is also is critical to keep confidential, and that's pursuant to TCA 107504. So the way we're asking you to work through this approval is through this resolution. The plan is not attached because, of course, we want to keep it confidential, and we're happy to share it with you at your convenience. So whenever you'd like to do that, you can reach out to me or Jason Potts. And so with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I will say that while we didn't have a cybersecurity plan in place prior to this point, we had all the elements of a cybersecurity plan. So it was really essentially compiling that information together. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Because I kind of work quasi in this space with the insurance side, but do we do any kind of third-party testing of that? I mean, data intrusion testing, and I think that would be a wise expense. Maybe not that, but having that third party, because what I see is a lot of times false senses of security within internally, and then having the third party come in is helpful. Yes, I have confidence in our IT team and staff, and that's not the question. I think it's just from our side of things, just that kind of confirmation. But
The answer is yes, but Christine can speak to that.
I think I would mention that within our IT budget, we do have funds for security assessments and on the operating budget, and that's where we do have third-party firms do security assessments of our networking. So that as Mark was saying, that's something that's been going on for some time, and then we receive reports from that assessment and then review that with the city administrator, and certainly they're acted upon. So
is that like a annual thing, quarterly? I mean, I think, and we could talk offline about this, but I think the whole
it's regularly.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And it is a blend. We've had folks we've worked with for a long time, but in recent years we've brought in some other entities so that we get a different perspective. So we try to have a mix there to keep it tested. You should never feel complacent about this stuff, and we know that, and we see the examples all over the country and all over the state that happen from time to time, and we want to make sure we're staying diligent on it. But it's a challenge, no question.
It is. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Then I will entertain a motion to approve and forward to the full board.
So moved.
Proper motion, a second.
Yes, sir.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Alderman
Yes.
Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that. So 3-0 to approve from the committee and forward to the full board. Let's go to item 3, which is consideration of draft resolution 2023-35, a resolution authorizing the pre-ordering of certain vehicles and equipment due to long lead times for FY 2024 and FY 2025.
So if we, as we've done this in recent years, because the lead time for even consumer vehicles such as SUVs and pickup trucks is fairly long, and then you look at larger pieces of equipment such as a side loader, we're looking at 18 months lead time for those. We have a number. I think we have 5 on order currently, and it's been over. By the time we receive them, it will have been over 18 months. So it's been really difficult and challenging. Previous resolutions that the board had approved were really related to the upcoming fiscal year. And what I'm asking for you all to entertain this evening is not only for the FY24 replacement vehicles, and then there's a handful of pieces of equipment that are in the recommended budget through PERs, and I'll be happy to get into the details. But there are 2 replacement side loaders scheduled in FY25 at the Sanitation and Environmental Services Department. And then there is 1 side loader that we anticipate buying for growth. So with that said, I'd like to see if you would entertain the ability for us to pre-order those as well, considering it will take the balance of this fiscal year, the entirety of FY24, and then we expect a number of months into FY25. So Michael has the list or the costs associated with the replacement vehicles and the vehicles and equipment that was laid out in the PERs, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Is there a policy, I mean, that we could put in place, if this is going to be a continuing issue, is there some sort of policy we could put in place so that we don't have, I mean, I don't know, and maybe you don't have to answer now, but because I struggle keeping up with what we've approved for pre-order and not approved, and what, and I trust, but I think probably like the other alderman, I trust that if these are going to be regularly scheduled purchases, is there something where you wouldn't have to bring everyone back to us? Or is
We
this
could look
the best
at
way?
some element of our replacement cycle that might be helpful. We try to keep it in sync with the budget process. We try not to get in front of you too far on that, but we know the reality of how long this stuff takes. That's why you see there's only 2 pieces of equipment out in 25, but they are, to us, kind of no-brainers. I guess it's 3 pieces of equipment.
Yes,
isn't
sir.
it? So yeah, but those are no-brainers to us when we look at the needs of sanitation to have those upgrades. So and those replacements. So let us look at that, what that might look like, and maybe we could do it earlier in the budget. But I kind of hate to do it too far out of step with your budget process because yeah, and I want to make sure you're comfortable and it's fitting with what you're seeing submitted by departments and that sort of matches. But we'll look at it with our fleet folks too and see if there is if there's a timing that would work better for them, but it could also keep it in line with a general replacement cycle or schedule so that we're not out of line with that. And we're going to be selective in looking at the most challenging ones and the most impactful ones in terms of the big equipment, essentially. So.
Even if you look at the 5-year outlook, I mean,
Yeah.
this isn't going to be hopefully not like this forever. But if you looked at a 5-year out kind of replacement schedule, and then we gave you some guidance, if you've within this range, just
Yeah.
do what you need to do, and then
Yeah, I know Kim Hammond, who's in the audience here, and Jerry Hatcher in the street department are working through that right now. What they're working to do is develop really what an annual sort of, as you know, we developed that fund for replacement vehicles. So they're trying to develop a number to put into that fund annually. And then on top of that, identify the vehicles on a 5-year cycle in which we would have them replaced. So that's to come, but that's still a work in progress.
because I don't know why we would say no. I guess if you bring these, why would we say no? We don't have any other information on why we would say no. And so it's kind of like, well, if we're relying on your expertise on that already, but anyway, we can move on, but that's,
Okay, understand.
You will still appropriate these
Yeah.
in the fiscal year that we believe that we will
Absolutely.
take ownership of the vehicle. So there will be the annual allotment of those resources separate from the pre-ordering because it takes so long.
but we won't be able to back out of it at that point.
That would essentially be correct.
So I guess what I'm saying is we're just, that sound,
Yeah.
we don't know what's going to happen in 2025,
We
but
don't.
trusting that this is, we're kind of already trusting you to do this anyway, that this is
Yeah.
a smart move anyway.
And I know this is a big ask because, going out 2 fiscal years, that's a big deal. So I recognize that. And I don't believe that we're going to have turnaround times on the, particularly these side loaders, improve
Come down.
in the next
Yeah.
few
Okay.
years. So, thank you.
Any other questions or comments about the projected side loader for 2025 and projected replacement of 2 side loaders for 2025? I will, Lan, you have anything? I will say this, I think probably to have a policy, I think that, but first off, you're obligating a board 2 years from now who may not even have the same alderman on the board. We might be in a recession
Understand.
if we listen to the gurus as to whether or not we are or not. So I think that probably doing it the way we're doing it is a little bit more comfortable with me.
Okay.
I don't have any problem with the other either as far as that. We'll probably, once we place the order, we're gonna be contractually obligated to purchase the vehicles, but are you comfortable that they'll be ready to go in 2025?
I'm hopeful we will receive them in FY 2025.
Okay.
I do know that the 5 side loaders are going to they'll have to be reappropriated essentially for FY '24, and I'll keep my fingers crossed that we'll get them in that fiscal year.
Any other comments or questions? Then I'll entertain a motion to draft the draft resolution of 2023-35, which is authorizing the pre-ordering of certain vehicles and equipment.
I move that we recommend approval of this to the board.
Second?
Proper motion and a second. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that,
Thank you.
to be forwarded to the full board. Let's go to item 4. Consideration of draft ordinance 2023-17, an ordinance to amend the budget of the city of Franklin for fiscal year 2022-2023.
Good afternoon. Ordinance 2023-17 is the second and final amendment to the fiscal year 2023 budget. You've seen this. This always is on the May meeting to go along with the approval of the upcoming budget. The next item, Eric will present to you his proposed budget for the following year. All of the numbers in that document are reflective of this amendment herein, hence why this amendment comes first. All of these items are being taken in order for us to comply with year-end requirements of the State Comptroller's Office that each fund's budget be on a cash and fund balance, be at appropriate levels on both a cash balance and a fund balance level effective June 30th, 2023. To start, let's go to the general fund. There's an increase of revenues of $4.29 million. That breaks down as follows. The increase of $2.6 million in local option sales taxes from our original budget, $520,000 in state shared sales tax collections, $550,000 in additional alcohol tax collections, $1.25 million in additional property tax collections. That comprises 2 components. One, higher collections year-to-date than anticipated of $500,000, and a reduction of $750,000 in the amount to be charged off to the debt service fund. We'll speak to this in a minute, The debt service fund has accumulated a fund balance in and around $1.3 million. We think it will end near 1.5 million towards the end of the year. That is a pass-through fund. There is no need for the fund balance in that fund to be that high. And so in order to accommodate some additional transfers and needs at year end, we are recommending that you lower the property tax amount to the debt service fund and spend it on other items, which we will show you in the next slide. Finally, there's an increase of $21,000 to $91, which is the city's receipt from the opioid settlement that the state of Tennessee participated in, and that is to be spent on various supplies and training within public safety. There's a decrease of $1.35 million for grants for transportation projects. This is a usual pattern we see. You'll see an identical reduction in expenses. Those projects are set to go forward, however, in fiscal '24, and the fiscal '24 budget reflects the appropriate amount of grants, both revenues and expenses, accordingly. And because the general fund is always in balance from a budgeting perspective, the expenses are also increasing by $4,291,091. The bulk of the increase are in transfers to other funds. $1.5 million is going to precede needs in fiscal '24 for the capital vehicle fund. $1 million to the closed pension plan. $833,921 to the street aid fund for additional paving needs. That is comprised of $750,000 directly from the general fund and $83,921, which is the fiscal year 2022 receipt of sports gaming revenues to the city of Franklin, Tennessee. The legislation passed said that 80% of those proceeds must go to public education, 15% went to cities for this expressed purpose of use in transportation and paving related projects, and 5% to gaming anonymous programs. There's your factoid of the state legislature for the day. $500,000 to the sanitation fund to meet year-end cash balance requirements. There's also $1.73 million in overall wage increases to a variety of different departments. Because we have not done any other budget amendments, this incorporates all other things that have happened since August when the original pay increases went into effect. So this includes additional compression adjustments that were discussed in December and January. This includes any departments where they were fully staffed and the vacancy adjustments. Keep in mind that we reduce all departments as a budgeting tool by 3.5%. So if you're fully staffed, you need additional funds in order to meet your year-end budget balancing needs, as well as additional overtime needs in police and fire. The final amount of increases are approximately $363,411, and that's mainly for building repairs. The bulk of that is for a program enhancement that was proposed in fiscal '24 that we're doing in fiscal '23, and that is the modification and fixing of the fire station, the roof at fire station number 5. Lowering of expenses includes $1.35 million in transportation projects and the delay of purchasing new city court software to the tune of roughly $287,000. Any questions in the general fund before I go on to other funds?
I think on the ordinance itself, doesn't it have, instead of fire station number 5, it has fire station dollar mark 5?
It should be 5, yeah.
It should be fine.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know what I'm trying to say? It has a dollar mark there instead of having station.
It involves dollars for sure, but it is Station 5.
Yeah, and that's not in
think it's
the,
in the
that's just in the memo.
Yeah.
Not the actual ordinance.
Oh, really?
Yes, the ordinance it's budgeted under building project and facilities maintenance, and so it's incorporated into that expense amount. But we can correct the memo.
Is this reflect the additional 1 point? This would not be reflected in the budget, the capital vehicle fund, because we've not passed it yet.
In the proposed budget, it is.
It is.
Yes.
So the end of year '23, it has this one.
That's correct. The full budget document for next year is inclusive and incorporates everything that we're reviewing now. So that way you'd be able to see an apples to apples comparison of the modified amended fiscal '23 budget to the proposed budget in '24.
That was perfect. Thank you.
In other funds, as I mentioned, the increase to street aid, the increase to sanitation. There's also an increase of $268,500 to the hotel motel fund. This is for additional costs of the final costs of the Eastern Flank renovations and Second Avenue parking garage, waterproofing and repairs, as well as continued modifications to the new parking systems, counting systems at Second and Fourth Avenue garages. All of this work either has been completed or is set to be completed by June 30th of this year. And then finally, as mentioned, the decrease in the debt service fund of $750,000 and the increase in the capital vehicle fund of $1.5 million. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
When will we, Chairman, may I ask a question, Chairman?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
When the capital vehicle, I know this is it's in its infancy. What do we think a good carrying budget for that would be? Is this going to, for that capital vehicle fund, or is this going to kind of be the regular? Is that we just see how the year goes and at the end add to it to kind of, you know, with surplus to, does that make sense?
Yeah, we want to have an annual target.
Yeah.
But this
Hard-
helped
it's
us.
so new.
Yeah, and this helped us use those funds at the end of the year. We also did that with what sanitation fund needs to hit its target, and that helped us. We did things like the roof on Station 5 too. So there are times we use an anticipated surplus at the end of the prior year to help us manage the next year. But we do want to have a standard target. And Michael, do you have a ballpark number? It'd be good to share. I mean, it's still settling out, obviously, and costs continue to escalate. But we have a general range that we're looking at.
Between $1.5 million and $2.5 million would be my guess in terms of, because keep in mind, we had been achieving a target of roughly $1.5 million for cruisers, and those are included in this fund. And then there's probably another $500,000 to $1 million of non-police general fund fleet needs. The sanitation, stormwater, and water and sewer needs are not included in this fund. Those are still in their respective funds. So the overall fleet replacement is larger, but in terms of this fund, I would say probably between $2 to $2.5 million on an annual basis.
And we've made the large fire apparatus are all done through bond funding,
Yep.
just because they're so expensive and they have a very long useful life, a 20-year useful life. So that's also part of the equation.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Then let's do a motion to consider draft ordinance 2023-17 and approval from the committee, forwarding it to the full board.
Motion to recommend ordinance 2023-17 and recommend to the full board.
Proper motion to a second.
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
The chair votes yes also. So it passes 3-0. Let's go then to item 5, which is consideration of draft ordinance 2023-18. An ordinance of the city of Franklin, Tennessee, adopting a budget for the fiscal year 2023-2024, providing an effective date. Mr. Stuckey, they only have one name on this as a sponsor.
I get to do this
Yeah.
one. All right, let's pull it up here. So you have in front of you, or we gave to you Friday afternoon, a 482-page document. The good news is I'm not going to go through all 482 pages today, but if you give me about a half hour, I'll give you a good overview of what is in here and the work that has gone into it. You all have worked diligently over the last 3 months in reviewing and hearing from departments about their requests and also given us additional feedback on how to look at the enhancement requests from departments. And we are proud to present this to you today that reflects all of those decisions in a way that meets community needs and keeps us moving forward and is fiscally responsible and fiscally sound. So I'll walk through this with you. if you want to stop me along the way, feel free to, but there'll also be plenty of time at the end for discussion, questions, et cetera. So I'll take you through the overview, kind of what we focus on in this budget. The general fund, of course, our primary, most important fund that covers most of our services. The other funds that also are very, very important to our service delivery. And then just close it out with where we're positioned and how it looks to move forward. You provided us with budget goals back in December of 2022. There are a number of them, but overall, here's kind of what we hope to achieve in an operating budget. We want to maintain high-quality services. We want to preserve our capacity to both meet current needs, but also how are we going to fare long-term, and that we can sustain our level of service and the support for quality of life in our community. We're investing in and planning for the future, and that we maintain a position and build our position as a highly competitive community. Our city competes every day for people's investment, whether it's where they choose to live, where they choose to build their business, where they choose to spend their leisure time and visitor revenue that we achieve through being that community people choose to visit and spend time in. Top line numbers, the all budgets, all rolled together, all funds budget is $218.1 million. That is around a 0.5% increase over where we are today with the fiscal 23 budget. When you separate out, again, our primary operating fund, the general fund, it's at $102.5 million, and that's a growth of 3.4% compared to the current budget. Some key highlights that I would focus in on about this budget up front. It is a balanced budget, meaning our ongoing revenues and expenditures are in sync. We have fully complied with the board's policy regarding debt and regarding our fund reserves. We're well above those targets set in those policies in terms of the reserves. Essential services are both maintained and in a number of places enhanced in this budget. The property tax remains at the same level. There's no increase in our property taxes, and that is a 32.61 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. That is the lowest property tax of any city with a population of 50,000 or greater in the state of Tennessee. It is among the very lowest property taxes of comparable cities and the cities we compete against across the nation. The budget does include 3 new positions. They all happen to be firefighter positions, on-shift positions, so 1 per shift. And there are several reclassifications, upgrades of positions to more reflect the work and expectations for those jobs across the organization, but that includes communications, streets, police, engineering, and fire. We do have 1 additional position in water management, but we actually have the same number of funded positions in water management. So we rearranged a little bit that structure, but have the same number of funded positions that we have in the current budget. The budget does include a adjustment for our team members in terms of pay, a base adjustment of 3%, and a additional adjustment based on performance based increases that will range up to an additional 2.5%. Health insurance premiums, we're going to be able to hold the line in fiscal 24 for our team members there. So no change in health insurance premiums across the board for city team members. The budget does include a recommended increase in the residential trash and recycling collection fee. That monthly fee would move from $22 to $23. And also, we are recommending the next 2 years of your 5-year rate plan be implemented for water and sewer. And so that would be 3% for both calendar year 24 and calendar year 25 in water, and in sewer in 24 and 25, 2.5% and 2% respectively in those 2 calendar years. We like to do those in those chunks of 2 years at a time. And quite frankly, we'll be due to update our 5-year plan, rate plan, as we're probably partway through 2025. The budget does incorporate performance measures, sustainability initiatives across the organization. We work hard to link all of our initiatives and what we measure and what we do to the city's strategic plan as well. All right, so let's look at where the money comes from. The revenue, sales tax continues to be the driver of our revenue picture overall at 58.1%. just under $60 million in total revenue from that source. And then you see next state shared tax, which is essentially sales tax coming back to the city on a per capita basis from the state of Tennessee. The property tax that remains after we pay our general obligation debt goes to fund the general fund, and so that's at 11%. Alcohol taxes at 5%. And then you see a mix of various fees, both general fees paid by like permits and licenses, franchise fees, grants, court fines and fees, et cetera, all in that 2.5% or less, making up the balance of the total general fund, which is $102.5 million. Different way to look at it. We've introduced this several years ago, but it is interesting. Nearly 80% of that budget is consumption-based. So it's driven by direct consumer activity in our community. Fortunately, we have a very vibrant, active local economy. We are a retail hub for the region, which is great. But that is also an area that's pretty sensitive to economic change. And so that is in part why we have a higher reserve policy than a lot of communities, and really guard that carefully, because we know when there are economic downturns and changes, we see those impacts pretty quickly in a sales tax and a consumption-based budget. All right, so let's look at where we spend it. First of all, by the functional areas, public safety is nearly half of our general fund expenditures. Police and fire make up 48.5%. Then you see public works coming in just under 15%. And then our other operations and economic and community development elements and our general finance and administration all around 10%. So when you look at it by expenditure category, that's in the general fund, 72% is basically salaries and benefits for our team members. So that's a significant piece of what we do. 25% is basic operational costs, and the capital component is largely equipment costing $50,000 or more at 3% or $2.7 million. All right, so this gives you a picture of our financial performance, ranging from our actuals in 2015 all the way up to what we're projecting in the fiscal 24 budget. So really a 10-year horizon. And you've seen steady performance and consistent times where we've managed to live within our means every year in this time frame and build our reserves in that time frame. We do submit to you every year a structurally balanced budget. So we don't necessarily plan on adding to the reserves, but our stewardship by our departments helps us contribute each year to those reserves. And you see that green bar growing as well. And we expect to add in this fiscal year 23, between now and the end of June, another $2.7 million to our reserves to reach a level of $77.1 million. And compared to the recommended 24 budget, that's about a 75% level. So it's significantly above what you have in your policy. And those are dollars that can be used to help us fund capital projects as well, and not have to issue as much debt. So when I step back and look at how we performed against the goals and against what we try to achieve, again, we are delivering a high level of services and continue to work to enhance those while maintaining one of the lowest property tax rates in the state of Tennessee. We are investing in our people. As you know, last year in fiscal 23, we did a significant upgrade on our pay plan to the tune of about $8.5 million additional funding into compensation for our team, which is significantly higher over a normal year. We were able to sustain that and provide a significant increase heading into fiscal 24 for our team members. We are supporting capital investment projects. There's about $14.5 million worth of cash-funded investment in this budget for capital investment projects. And again, our reserves are healthy, well above your policy levels. And in fact, when you look at how this lays out, you've got over $30 million of eligible funding for cash funding of capital investment projects. All right, so here's a summary table. I won't go through all this. We'll break it down in the next several slides, but these are your various general fund revenue sources and what those are projected at in fiscal 24. And you'll see on the far right-hand column, the projected growth or change in those revenue sources across the board. So this is a good summary table, and the next several slides will break down these key revenue sources for you.
And it's showing building permits definitely are lower.
We brought that down. It's conservative. If you look at it, it's pretty similar to the actuals in 22, 2 years ago. But we're being conservative there, but we want to put a number in that we think we will achieve. We haven't seen a huge slowdown in activity, but we want to be careful in what we project as well. All right, so I'll walk through some of these for you. Of course, sales tax is the lion's share. It is about $59.5 million. That is a projected growth of 2% in what we're projecting today in fiscal 23. We're projecting a growth of 2%. We feel that's pretty conservative. We always try to strike a balance of being conservative, but also not being so under-projected that we are leaving money on the table that can help us achieve things and get work done in the community. We've experienced nearly 5% growth so far through fiscal 23, which we're glad to see. We saw strong growth in the prior 2 years once we got through the initial push and shutdowns associated with the pandemic. We've seen very strong growth. And again, it's 58.1% of our general fund revenue. This shows the relative comparison of sales tax to property tax over the last 9 to 10 years. And you see we've seen steady growth in property tax, but you've seen significant growth in sales tax. And of course, those last 3 bars reflect the city capturing its portion of the half-cent sales tax that voters approved in 2018, followed by a 3-year period of our half being dedicated to public education, and then that being fully restored to the city in the spring of 2021 as the typical pattern of the city capturing half of local sales tax and the other half going to schools. So that's reflected in these last 3 bars. So that growth is a reflection of that, as well as healthy economic growth over the last 3 years as well. I always comment that we are probably the inverse of every other city, or most every other city in Tennessee, in that the lion's share is in sales tax, a 2-to-1 plus ratio compared to property tax, and in most communities that's the reverse. Yeah. Go ahead. Do you have?
I'll wait.
Okay. I'll still be here. Looking at our next revenue source, of course, as I referenced, is the intergovernmental revenue, and that is, again, sales tax from the state's portion, which is a 7% sales tax coming back to local communities based on a per capita rate. So our population helps drive that. That is why you see us probably every 3 or 4 years between federal censuses doing a special census when we're growing at the rate we're growing to make sure we're getting our fair share. But we, again, put a pretty conservative 2% growth on that. But that ripples through in terms of the sales tax performance the state sees, and their growth in sales tax has been pretty comparable to ours. Number of months above, but pretty close to one another, mirroring one another. Of course, property tax, as I shared with you, is an important revenue source as well. We always pay our debt obligations first with our general fund property tax, the general obligation debt first, and then the balance goes to operations. In this case, that's $11.6 million. We did see an 8.6% growth there. We have seen healthy growth and new construction coming onto the tax rolls, but we also fully retired the industrial development bond, the TIF bonds that we issued were retired a little over a year and a half ago, and then we needed to pay ourselves back some funds that the city had put up front to help the IDB get started with that loan repayment. So we repaid ourselves, and fiscal 24 represents the first full year of that property tax being completely incorporated into our general fund property tax base.
Before we leave that right there, I don't see that on my computer, but anyway, if you look, the property tax back in the 80s.
Yes. this is when you see a couple things going on, a lot of growth and investment in the community. The Cool Springs Galleria Mall comes into effect in the early 90s.
91.
And that changes our reliance on property tax versus sales tax, quite frankly. And you see us in the early 90s drop below $1. In the early to mid 2000s drop below 50%. And now we're at 32 cents per $100 of assessed valuation. So the other thing to bear in mind, next year will be a reevaluation or reassessment time for the county assessor. And that cycle has changed from a 5-year cycle to a 4-year cycle. So a year from now, we'll be looking at updated property assessed values. So that will change the math related to this rate again. So just keep that in mind. All right. Not sure what happened there. There we are. All right. So other important revenue sources, again, alcohol tax, it's a consumption tax as well at 5.5 million. It's about a 3.5% growth there from the current year. As Alderman Peterson pointed out, building permits and licenses at 2.3 million, a decrease of about 14% where we are today. Again, I think we're being conservative on that, but we feel good about that number, that is reliable from a budgetary standpoint. We do have some growth in grants, especially as they relate to transportation projects. We've got some of the signalization projects, et cetera, that are rolling through our budget. And so that helps enhance that source on a one-time basis as we're funding those projects, largely at an 80% match rate with local funds. And then we do see some growth in our interest income as we see interest rates rise there.
Eric, can you click on and click off your?
Oh.
The big screen is frozen.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Don't know why.
Let's try that
Try
again.
that again.
Okay.
There you
So
go.
let me take you back. I'm not sure why it's not letting me advance. There it is. So we saw that slide. This slide just gave you some numbers about alcohol, building permit, and grants. So there's nothing that dramatic here. And then this is our general fund balance summary. We talked about this a little earlier when we looked at that kind of 9 to 10 year outlook. But ending fund balance at the end of this fiscal year at $77.1 million. That's a increase year to year from 22 to 23 of $2.7 million. And then again, we put forward to you a fully balanced budget so that we would expect that if everything holds to remain at 77.1, which is a 75% balance. Your fund minimum is at 33%, and everything above 45% is deemed eligible for cash funding of capital investment projects. So again, that's somewhere a little above $30 million that could be used for that, and that we largely plan as a cash source for capital investment. Again, we try not to leave dollars on the table going year to year. We fully budget ongoing revenue to ongoing expenditures, but we do have a conservative nature, and our departments do a good job stewarding funds, so we do generate some consistent reserve contributions. And again, within that reserve, there are some specific designated reserve funds for various exposures the city has and helps provide a safeguard there. So this is a numerical breakdown of the charts I showed you before in terms of our functional areas by department. And then, of course, those expenditure categories, personnel, operations, and capital. This just gives you that breakdown and a couple years of history and a budget-to-budget comparison, 23 to 24. So there's a good number of numbers there, but it shows how we're tracking year to year in those categories.
If you look at personnel
Yes.
from 2021,
Yeah, you look at how that has grown, 21, 22, 23, that really captures the adjustments in the pay plan and updating our compensation. Again, we were about 5 years off of that update, and COVID contributed 2 of those 5 years because of our inability to get good data to make good market decisions. And of course, we've seen a lot of labor scarcity really across a lot of places, not just, a lot of times we see it in areas like IT, engineering, but we're seeing it across the board, especially law enforcement and a number of areas. So it's really been organizational wide, and our comprehensive update of the pay plan last year is driving that as well.
It's also important to remember that fiscal 20 and 21 were scaled back years.
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
So
great point.
if we had continued without the pandemic, those actuals would have been higher and not quite as dramatic an increase over that 4-year window.
Yeah, fiscal 21 is really a full pandemic
that
year.
is- that
And you
is
may
indeed.
remember, we froze positions, we held vacancies because of all the uncertainty. So it is definitely, and part of 22, definitely probably a little lower than normal because we did hold so many vacant positions.
Well, we pull about 6 million out of that
We did.
from the agreed to the new budget that we were looking at, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, there were some significant adjustments just with all that uncertainty. So that's a great point Michael made, especially looking at 21 as a comparison. All right, one of the other important elements within the general fund is our pension funding. This is something we've worked diligently on, and we've made some adjustments in that program overall. Christine talked about it just on Tuesday night with you, so some of this should look pretty familiar. But we've got an $8.9 million overall investment in our pension, both the closed pension and the open or TCRS program. We are funding the actuarially requested or recommended, required, yes, required, not requested, but required, investment in our pension, and then we are putting additional money on top of that. So we want to make sure we're in a good place, but we did see year to year, and it's always done at the end of the calendar year, a pretty significant reduction from a 91% funded ratio to below 80%. When you look at December 31, 2022. So that's the reality we're dealing with, but still in a good position overall. And now over a third of our employees are in the open program, which is the TCRS funded, just in that 6+ years of that change. So it is the complexion of that pension program is changing as we add more folks into that program. All right, so the funding for outside agencies is incorporated here. Generally, we added 5% to those agencies compared to 2023. We do have some exceptions when you look at animal control. We fund what they request, and so that was incorporated there. And of course, last year we did do some additions with the added maintenance funding at Toussaint L'Ouverture Cemetery, and some adjustments there you see carrying through 23 into 24. So that's there as well. This is just a summary of all the other funds and where you can find them in the budget document. This is just a helpful reference for that. Do you have a question, Ann?
I just wanted to say, whenever I was looking through here on the road impact fund,
yes.
which are pages 233 to 236, it was really crazy because, on the collector roads, it's got 4 little graphs there, but in areas 1 and 3, the highest number is like 50,000. In area 2, it's 400,000, and in area 4, it's 10,000 as the lowest thing. So even though well, maybe the one on number 4 doesn't look like this, but on the other 2, the ones that go, that this graph that they show, and that were the ones that are just up to 50,000, looked just like the graph that was 400,000. So that was kind of weird. I mean, I can understand it, but still.
So this is on the monthly reports that you're referring to. Because we don't actually break out the collector via charts. We don't break out the collector within the budget document.
Or maybe,
I mean,
I've seen it.
We
on
do
here,
we do
though.
break out
Probably
on
in the
page
monthly
236. We've got a line for the arterial, and then the individual estimates for collector roads. The graphs within the monthly reports are set to the high amount of that particular area. So they do
Exactly.
look similar.
Exactly.
Because collector area,
Is it 2? Yes, is that
Two.
like,
collector area 2 has a high end of 400,000, but collector area 3 has a high end of 50,000. So the graphs
And we'll
themselves
also-
will look similar as opposed to
that's right.
if they were all set at $1 million, they'd be very small and, yeah.
Did you, on the outside entities, I think we just, would reiterate that, some kind of I mean, I do feel like this is kind of, a bit of throwing, I don't know, I don't know the consistency. I think we talked about this in the actual budget, coming up with, outside entity policy of what, what we want to spend city funds on, impacting certain numbers of people. I don't know, a little more criteria. I think, not to call out specific ones, but I have already done that. I think that, last year the Sister Cities was a 1-year ask, and now because on these, once you kind of get in,
Correct.
you don't
get out.
get out. Which, in a lot of cases, it's great. But I think as we, over time, it grows, and I think this is a very important part of the budget. Obviously, we a lot of times non-governmental organizations can do things that we can't do. But I would like a board policy or at least a discussion on kind of, if we were going to vision our outside appropriations, like what is important for us as a city? What can we not do well as a city government that we really would like to focus on outside entities, kind of instead of just like throwing it out there and seeing who sends in an application, if that makes sense. I'm
Yeah.
not necessarily asking for a change, but I do think it would be prudent to think about that, and then we could start maybe spending this money, and not that the things in here aren't good, but just a little more.
Virtually all are.
They're all
Yeah.
great, yes,
Really.
but I guess it's really whoever applies.
Well, there is a blend here, and there are certain ones that are absolutely, really extensions of city services.
Absolutely.
That they are either our partner or they are our substitute. Like
Yes.
animal control,
Yes.
we would have to do it if they didn't. They're doing it for us. God bless them. We'll pay them what they need to do it. There are others that are complementary or key partners. Bridges,
Right.
Davis House. They work closely with the police department, and we need them to do what they do to respond to certain, especially really difficult responses that our law enforcement team is involved in. So those fall into almost like a direct citizen or service provision model. There are others that are just really beneficial in the community, important partners, whether it's like the library or some of the other social service agencies that are just things you have a history of supporting and that have a community benefit. And then there are others that are more in the economic development realm. So it's a blend, and maybe sort of breaking them out over time might be helpful to look at. But there are a variety of those are, I think, 3 broad categories that help capture most everything. Sister Cities is a little unique right now because they had a one-time bump this year for some significant visits that were happening, but they did not use all those funds. So they asked and requested to sort of carry over some of that into the new fiscal year because this Humboldt exhibit is coming in, I think, November, late fall, and will be hosted. And so they wanted to provide at least some additional financial support and said, can we just carry some of that money we didn't use in fiscal 23 into fiscal 24? So
And it's not
I
just
think that's
about-
largely reflected here, but
Totally
we need
fine.
to look
But
at that.
You understand. I mean,
Yep.
I think if we think about, instead of just asking folks to submit whoever having maybe one conversation
Mm-hmm.
about what it is outside agencies that we think are really doing what we can't do. But anyway, I thank you for your time.
Well, maybe we can do a little bit of analysis to give you a sense of how those dollars fall out within that total budget. Just to,
And the other thing just because they ask for some amount of money doesn't necessarily mean they get.
No, that's very true. They did not all get what they requested in this budget. That's why we sort of defaulted to an inflationary adjustment, because we know we scaled them back a couple years ago, and we've been inching that back up, but to reflect the inflationary impact. But and then we did add a couple, but yeah, we don't grant everything at what is requested, although we do try to look at if there's some exceptional need and get your guidance on that.
Well, to add on to that, you know,
Too
you
far.
you possibly could look at each of the entities and see what their budget was 10 years ago,
Yeah,
9 years ago, 8, whatever it was, and see what the increase is. I'm like Patrick, Alderman Daggett, we struggle with this, but it's overall a small amount, so therefore, we may not struggle enough to get to the point where we need to get to. And I agree, yeah, because I fill those things out.
yeah. Oh, you've been there.
I've been there. I feel about the clay center, and I know what we have to go through, what we had to go through when we did those right there. Do you ever see any of the paperwork on any of the entities?
Well, it's in that, yeah, I looked through it. It's
You look through some of them,
extensive,
Yeah,
which is,
and I'm just,
And
and
we
I'm not
do-
saying that takes care of your concern, but, I mean, you can kind of look through those, but I think what Eric has said, because we've got, we don't want to be in the dog catching business.
no.
Yeah, there are some that I look at as really almost mandatory because of the services they help us deliver. And there are others that are a little more discretionary, but you have really good policy reasons why you support them. We can certainly give you some breakdown over time, what that looks like. And that might just be something helpful. We do a contract with each of them to establish the public purpose, provide accountability back, and that they do appropriate record keeping on the public dollars they receive. So we've really put a structure in place to make sure there's good accountability. But we're glad if you'd like to, this year or in next year's process, provide you a little more of a analysis.
Next year's fine. I think if you boil it down, I think if we set some areas where we're open to, so for instance, like Davis House has requested a significant amount
Yeah.
more than they've received, and I kind of feel like, well, if the board said, hey, actually, Children's Services, who work with our police officers, is actually a higher priority than some of these other things, then maybe that would influence some of that. And I pointed them out, but it may be, if we give those kind of priorities, then maybe that would help as well. And I would be willing to add more on the appropriation of this if it lined up with our priorities and they were doing something of real value to our city from with staff and,
Yeah.
and law enforcement. But just because they come in with a double amount of money and we say, well, we're not going to do that, we'll do a little bit more. And this is not critical of the decision-making process, but if we speak to the priorities, then maybe that helps guide some. Thank you. We've spent a lot of time on this.
I would say one other thing, as far as the animal control, we pay county taxes, so we support the animal control. And then we turn around and do a city subsidy on that right there. So the city taxpayer, in my opinion, is getting billed twice for that. What we do as far as the appropriations are concerned, what we do through the county. Same thing with the library. We pay county taxes, support the library. And there's probably some others on there also. But a city person, and I don't know whether what about the convenience centers? Does the county do the convenience centers all themselves?
Yes.
We do not contribute to those. at all.
Okay,
Yeah.
good enough. Because it used to be a tax rate that the county did on that,
Yeah.
that the city person did not pay.
Yeah, there is still a reduction on the property tax because of the sanitation services we provide in the
Okay,
city.
But there are still some services that they provide that the city does not. On the shredding and
Oh,
everything.
Okay, yeah. But we provide the battery, oils, paint, electronics for the
Big
whole
deal.
county through the city. So we're having some discussions about that too.
Big deal.
How we can work together on that, because they did a great job helping us with the capital costs of setting up that service 14 years ago, but we've borne all of the operating costs since. So we're talking about how to maybe have more of an ongoing operating arrangement. So either that or trade off something else they could do for our citizens. While I have this slide up, I am going to highlight something that I did not do a slide on that I just want to touch on, and that's the Street Aid Fund. And Michael may need to help me with a couple numbers here, but we did make some adjustments in this fund to make the most of our pavement preservation and neighborhood street resurfacing. We added money out of fiscal 23, and Michael touched on that in the amendment component. And so that's adding funding there. And what was that, Michael? 750,000?
833,000.
833,000. So that helps us go directly towards the paving and resurfacing. And you remember, we're doing pavement preservation as well, which is some treatment that helps us not have to repave as quickly. So there's that piece. We have also added some general fund funding to what we call asset maintenance program, which is paving of non-streets, but that are city facilities, things like multi-use trails, parking lots, those kind of things that don't always get addressed, and they always seem to fall behind taking care of streets, which is very understandable, but that need grows if we don't have a regular program to maintain it. So we do have that. We do continue to fund the sidewalk gap, which are smaller sidewalk projects that help fill in gaps, connect neighborhoods, those sorts of things as well. So there's a pretty significant growth in that fund. It's driven by moving some money from 23 that'll help us fund more work in 24, just so we can get done the amount of work that our streets team has identified as needing it. So that you see a pretty significant growth there, but that's what's driving it.
Thank you so much for Eddie Lane.
Yes.
In the last day or two. I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing.
It does make a difference,
Yes,
yes.
it does.
Well, that's good. So I did want to highlight that because I didn't have a slide, and that's an important area of another fund area. On stormwater, no fee change. It's right at $3.5 million there. Sanitation, again, we talked about this in the highlights, but we are recommending adjusting that fee $1 from $22 a month to $23 a month, and that's an all-in cost that covers trash, recycling, yard waste, bulky goods, everything you put out there, pretty much that covers it. You may remember we worked diligently this past year to provide more capacity and have a 10-year, at least minimum of 10 years of capacity for landfill and for recycling. And we have managed differently our transportation and a compaction element
Yes.
that will help us live with higher volumes at the existing transfer station, which helps us avoid a significant capital expense. So there's been a lot of action going on in the sanitation service area this last year that I think gives us really good sustainability over the next 10 plus years. That has been really important, but that brings some cost implications as well. But we feel really good to have capacity and rate certainty for the next 10 years. There is no general fund subsidy budgeted in that fund, but we are needing to contribute about $500,000 in fiscal 23 to make sure we reach our fund balance requirements per the state of Tennessee. We have a couple equipment replacements and a couple equipment additions. The additions are covered through the facilities tax fund. And so you see that element. You will see a cost of service study coming back to you either later this fiscal year or the early part of next fiscal year that will take a 5-year outlook. Now that we have certainty around the rate structures at landfill and recycling and what that needs to look like, kind of like we do with water and sewer, to give you a sense of get full cost recovery, what those rates might need to be. Hotel Motel, this is continuing to pay both debt service in that fund for the acquisition of Harlansdale Park and for Eastern Flank Battlefield Park, as well as funding our contribution, 1% of the 4% tax to the operations of the Convention and Visitors Bureau. And then we fund various capital projects with cash through that fund, around $1 million there as well. We do have some additional project funds in Hotel Motel this year. The first year of the 2-year federal line marker project that the Civil War Historic Commission brought to you earlier this year, there is year 1 funding. And then we added an additional funding of the portable vehicle barriers that we got one set of a year or so ago that help us with downtown festivals. We want to get another set. They're portable. We can move them to other events, but they're very helpful with the large downtown festivals in terms of keeping those side streets blocked off and safe. So we've had good experience with that. We'd like to add some to that. The various development funds, we have pretty conservative projections there, and road impact, parkland, county and city facilities. But we are also putting significant cash into capital projects, $8.25 million going into those projects, those project needs in the new fiscal year. And again, we put a pretty conservative estimate on what we expect to come in there. Road impact, we're still paying some debt service out of that fund that goes back several years there as well. Water and sewer funds, we talked about the rate increases. We're following the 5-year plan, 3% in each of the next 2 calendar years in water, and 2.5%, it should be actually calendar 24, and 2% in calendar 25, so we'll fix that typo there. But we are in good position there. We do have a peak of debt service requirements there in fiscal 24 as we are fully starting to repay the 30-year loan from the State Revolving Loan Fund of $119 million. Most of that at a rate below 1.5% interest rate there, which is a very, very favorable terms for us. But overall debt service exceeding $10 million in that fund. We do hit our debt service coverage requirements, and so we are in good shape there. We are putting some investments into water and sewer from the American Rescue Plan dollars that you'll see in just a little bit here. So that's what this slide reflects. Again, we got just under $9.3 million, $9.25 million of funding as a direct contribution to the city for the rescue plan dollars coming from the federal government. We've already spent just under 2.2 million of it, and have committed to the balance of that money through the projects you see identified below the line, the second half of this slide. Again, about $1 million going towards support of utility work for affordable housing projects at Franklin Housing Authority, and also a significant project at Lewisburg for upgrades of water and sewer infrastructure in that area. You look at design money above the line that's already been spent, and you look at capital project money, that brings it to a total in excess of $5 million for that project. And then again, we are doing some additional tourism and hospitality investment with garage improvements and extending the life of our garages, as well as the conference center enhancements that are needed. And the county is matching that investment by the city with the same amount of $1.2 million there. Again, to kind of hit a summary of all the funds in the budget overall, we continue to be in a strong competitive position. There's been a lot of disruption and uncertainty over the last several years, and we've come out of it in a good, strong fiscal position, but also delivering services that support a high quality of life in Franklin that makes us competitive, highly competitive. We continue to invest in and support our city team, as well as invest in the future through capital projects, and your reserves are at an extremely healthy level as we head into the new year. That concludes it. I want to extend my thanks to our team. You got to see all of them over the last 3 or 4 months come to you and talk about their needs, but there are lots of folks behind the scenes that help that happen. We want to thank everybody on our departmental team. I want to give my thanks to the assistant city administrators who helped me through this, the department heads, our human resources folks who look at personnel needs and what we have as we work through every department and every position. I want to especially thank Michael Walters-Young, who helps lead this process for us. He has the able support of Norma Lockney. Norma joined us recently. I think you've met her, but she works as a financial analyst, but works especially with Michael on budget. And Chris Franklin, who's our management fellow, also worked diligently. I mentioned the ACA, so. But Chris Franklin, who's now our public works service operations analyst, but as a management fellow, worked closely on the budget and did a good job stepping up. We had Michael out of pocket for a little bit with some family matters, but Chris was able to help us with that and keep us moving forward while Michael was tending to more important business with his family. So I'm just grateful for their great work. It's a great example of teamwork across the organization, and it's a good budget. It meets our needs and keeps us moving forward and serving the community, and I look forward to working through this with you. I'd request that you advance it to the full board, and we'll start our process and have first reading the last meeting in May, and then June, I think 13th, have our second reading and public hearing, and then close out the month with final adoption on June 27th. We do have your one-pager. This is something we developed several years ago, and former Alderman Margaret Martin, this is one of her favorite things, and so Michael always lovingly prepares this in honor of Margaret. But it is a great summary. It's a great thing to hand out to a citizen as a quick overview of what we do with their dollars and how we serve the community. So this is a great resource for you as well. Thank you, Michael, for pulling that together. So that concludes what I've got for you, and glad to take you through any other questions you have or anything else you need as we consider this budget further.
Any other questions? Then I'll entertain a motion.
I do have,
Go ahead.
I held a couple. On 24, to make sure I understand, page 24, the fund summary, budget summary. That the budgeted deficit is because that's all funds. Is that
That's because we're using
capital?
Yes.
Correct.
Funds.
Yeah, we're shifting cash into projects. Thank you.
So what would that, did we not do that in 21?
We did.
We did. So if you look at 21 and 22, those are positive fund balances. The details are kind of more clearly
In the back, yeah.
shown on, pages 26, 27. And if you had one page that summarizes everything from a budget and accounting standpoint in this budget, it's page 28. It's also the smallest print you're going to find in this budget, and that's not, there's a correlation there. That shows you changes in fund balance across all of the budgeted funds. The only requirement we have for a balanced budget is in the general fund. So that will always be balanced. But very intentionally, we've got negative balances at year end in some of these funds because we've accumulated cash in development funds, and we are then appropriating them for use in capital projects. So that's where the deficits come from. It's from development funds, and it's from like street aid. We are proud that we are appropriating $6.6 million this year, or in the upcoming year, to handle street paving, asset paving, sidewalk needs. That does not mean necessarily that come fiscal 25, there's another $6.6 million of recurring revenues. And in fact, there's not in 24. As we said, we've moved some money into it, so you're going to spend that fund balance down, do what we can, and continue to evaluate alternative funding sources and balancing street needs.
Another one was the hotel motel revenues negative projections on 311. Is that, am I reading that right? And this is not a, by the way, if I wrote this document and someone went through and checked behind me, I'm curious if there is a broader economic, not that it's an error, I'm just curious if there was some thought into that
So
hotel motel going down.
You will see overall from a two reasons. number one, the main reason is because fiscal year 23 and 22 include direct appropriations of ARPA funding for projects in that fund. That is not repeated in fiscal 24.
Got it.
That's the
difference.
so the actual
makes sense.
taxes, which are highlighted
Revenue
on page
shouldn't-
310, those collections we forecast going up nearly 16%.
Okay, all right, got it.
But the grants overall revenues kind of artificially inflate that. The other thing that's shown on page 311 is you'll notice in fiscal 22, and we talked about this when the audit was presented, you know, because of when the fiscal year occurred, it was not the greatest year in terms of earnings. And so you have negative interest income that appeared
Oh, yeah.
in many funds, and that's also reflected there. We are forecasting
Some,
small amounts. It will be higher than that, but again, given overall volatility and where we have things locked in, that should be positive.
It's the market value. It's not a true loss. It's the
Right,
market value.
Right, so the mark to market at the time that the
that's helpful.
fiscal year.
The
ended.
last one, and then we can move forward and other questions. But on 313, I thought this was interesting. It's a debt service fund, and I love the kind of benchmark metrics. Actually, there's two more things. This is the next to the last thing. But this is, I guess maybe, and we don't have to do this now, but as I look through those metrics at the bottom, as kind of benchmarks to, I guess these are best
This
practices.
is from your policy. This is actually from your debt policy.
Oh, this is the debt policy
This is-
metrics.
These are certain benchmarks we incorporate in there.
So kind of, because I was just doing some of the rough math, and you know how that goes sometimes. But you know, we might be with, and I was thinking City Hall and some of the other debt we have coming on, and it may breach one policy, but it still be within another policy. Am I reading that right? That it could, but just, and maybe we could talk offline.
Yeah,
but I'm curious to know how those kind of interact with what we're looking at from a future debt, and that probably actually lends itself more to the City Hall discussion, or as we look at the financials on that. But
When we do overall CIP, we do look at how this places us versus your policy and these benchmarks. So
Okay.
we don't put together or suggest a funding plan to support your CIP that takes you out of compliance with your policy.
so okay, and I actually will talk. I think I probably need more on this than what we probably should go into now.
Yeah, we're
But,
glad to.
and then the last thing is, I noticed like all the departments or the summaries, the benchmarking, and the Tennessee Benchmarking Alliance must be kind of slacking or something because it's always TBD, and so I guess I'm. Not that I guess I would love to see benchmarks, but I understand that maybe they're not out there. Maybe y'all have discussed this before.
So
I was on the board.
Backstory.
There's some history.
There's
here.
some history here.
Clyde's down there smiling, so he needs
The state of Tennessee, in fact, the Municipal Technical Assistance Service, as part of the Institute of Public Service, based out of UT Knoxville, for the better part of 2 decades, ran what was called the Tennessee Municipal Benchmarking Project. There was a change in direction 3 to 4 years ago where they decided no longer to support that project. Within an hour of that announcement, someone decided to barge into the city administrator's office in the city of Franklin, Tennessee, and said, "We can do that." So the Benchmarking Alliance for Tennessee is actually based out of the Budget and Analytics Division of the city of Franklin, Tennessee. And then COVID. So we've got several communities that are interested in continuing some version of simplified benchmarking. We actually have it on our website. The idea is that we used to have upwards of 1,200 metrics
Yeah, that's
that
too
we
much.
looked at,
Yeah.
and we boiled it down to 50 and made it free. But it's just not been as high a priority
Well,
to get it going, though with the addition of the new budget software and the ability to automate things, we really do hope to do that in time for next year's budget process. Not just for us, certainly. I'm speaking on behalf, helping to chair a committee of the Tennessee City Managers Association. City managers throughout the state are very interested in having that repository and having access to that data.
Yeah, because
But I'm the slacker.
no, I didn't mean, no, I just think that and there's so many possible benchmarks, but I think it would be helpful for us to see something that was really a question.
We can-
or a statement.
Yeah.
But I'm not criticizing. I'm
we're-
just
It's very helpful.
We're happy to provide you, because again, we developed it for use in the benchmarking project, those 50 to 60 metrics, because they just fit on 2 pages as opposed to
Yeah.
the voluminous amounts. Performance measurement here has been done for the better part of 15 years in the city of Franklin, and what we tried to do in creating the benchmarks, the metrics for the Benchmarking Alliance of Tennessee, is Holland Shellhouse, our first management fellow, actually investigated a wide variety of industry standards. So ICMA, GFOA, American Public Works Association, and then what Tennessee did, what the Florida Benchmarking Consortium does, what the Valley Benchmarking Group, that's sort of a conglomeration of 11 to 14 cities in and around the Phoenix area, what they did to try to come up with the simplified list of what really matters. So, thank you for your interest. And stay
Yeah,
tuned.
no, I think because how do we know what, I think it's good. And I know we would fare well, I think, when we benchmark against peers. And so the public knowing that as well, I think is very important. And us being able to point people to that. All right, thank you. That's all I have.
We will have a new management fellow in place in July, and I think there's a good chance we'll turn him loose on this project.
And the tradition continues.
Yes, that's right.
Welcome aboard, Mr. Potts.
Thank you, Alderman.
All right.
Alderman Potts, you want me to start over? I can.
Oh, yeah. You don't mind.
We may adjourn this.
You have to stay after class.
See ya. If there are no other questions, I'll entertain a motion.
Perfectly timed.
Yeah.
Recommend
Get your vote.
this to the board and mayor and alderman for approval.
Second?
Proper motion and a second. Let's do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on this also. So let's go to item 6 then. And that is consideration of draft ordinance 2023-19, an ordinance of the city of Franklin, Tennessee, establishing the municipal property tax levy for the fiscal year 2023-2024 and providing an effective date.
I'll turn that over to Michael Walters Young.
Mr. Chairman, this is your official ordinance to set the property tax rate. You are required under TCA, Tennessee Codes Annotated, to set a property tax rate annually. This is no change, and there is no increase in the rate proposed for fiscal '24.
Motion to recommend ordinance number 2023-19 to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen.
Second.
Proper motion and a second. Let's do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Peterson, how do you
Yes.
vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
And Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that. All right, let's go to item 7 then. Consideration of draft resolution 2023-38, a resolution of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen for the city of Franklin adopting the estimate of revenue and expenditures for the water and sanitary sewer utility fund for fiscal 23-24, also providing an effective date.
This is what we lovingly refer to as our belt and suspenders approach to the Water Management Fund budget. This summarizes just the pages that budget is included. So when we submit it to the state, we have a resolution that also goes in tandem with the budget ordinance. So this document, this official document, when you see it in Civic Clerk for first reading, as well as the budget document, will be 483 pages because Exhibit A is the book. Just FYI.
Any questions? Then I'll also entertain a motion related to item, resolution 2023-38. Do we have a
Motion to recommend to the board, motion to recommend resolution number 2023-38 to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen.
proper motion or a second?
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. You know, there for a minute or two, I thought it was the mayor that was, because, you know, he has difficulty getting that motion every once in a while, so.
Glad you feel my pain.
Let's go to item 9. Oh, I'm sorry, item 8. Consideration of draft ordinance 2023-20, the ordinance of the city of Franklin, Tennessee to amend Appendix A, comprehensive fees and penalties, Chapter 17, refuge and trash disposal of the Franklin Municipal Code to increase the fees for collections of garbage and refuse.
This is the dollar increase from $22 a month to $23 a month that's included in the recommended budget.
Any questions on that? Then I'll entertain a motion.
Help you out, Alderman. Mr. Chair.
I appreciate the help.
Yes, sir. I'll move that ordinance 2023-20 be recommended to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen for approval.
Proper motion to a second.
Second.
Then let's do a roll call vote on that. Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that. All right, let's go to item 9, consideration of draft ordinance 2023-21 and ordinance amending the City of Franklin Municipal Code Appendix A, comprehensive fees and penalties, Chapter 18, water and sewers for the purpose of updating water and sanitary sewer rates.
So as the city administrator previewed for you, this is also in the recommended budget. So we are looking at, again, 3% in both years for water, 2.5%, and then 2% for wastewater. As we traditionally do, we present two options, one of which is putting all that on the customer charge, which makes the revenue more stable. And the other option is to split it between the customer charge and the volumetric rates. Now, because I say that the customer charge is more stable because depending on the weather situation any given year, your volumetric rates may go, or your volume may go up and down depending on if it's hot, if it's rainy. So because we are still underfunded in that customer charge, those fixed fees that we need to pay, staff would recommend option A in both water and sewer, but we do present these two options.
And the customer charge is the fixed component. It does include, what, 1,000 gallons?
1,000 gallons.
1,000 gallons of water with it, but it is the fixed component, and the other is a volumetric. So that's what we're describing, and it is a calendar year rate, so it would not go into effect till January 1 of '24, and then January 1 of '25. But this is years 3 and 4 of your 5-year rate plan. It's reflective of that.
Any questions of that? Then I will entertain a motion. Do we need to, are we recommending option A within this to the full board?
What we
or
will do is, I think, write it as an option A, option B for the board to give us
Just like
guidance.
that.
So if you just forward it with those two options, and then that'll be something the board will need to weigh in on as we review it at, I guess, on the 23rd. We'll try to get that direction.
Is that fine with the committee?
Is that-
Then I'll entertain a motion.
Well, I'll ask, is that how it's been done in the past?
Well, in terms of the recommendation, well, we have done an A and B, and that you decide, and we've done it both ways. There's times we've added it only to the customer charge, and other times we've done a blend. So it just, it's your call, and both get us to where we need to be from a revenue standpoint. But yeah, we make a recommendation just looking at the structure of the rates and the fixed cost component, which actually has grown with the debt service piece, because that is a fixed cost. So I think that's part of why we're recommending that, but it is clearly your policy choice on how you want to allocate it.
Well, let me clarify my question. It was more of, have we in the past forwarded both a option and a B option?
Typically, we've had that be a board discussion and direction. We haven't done that at the committee level. You've sent it on, and then the whole board weighs in and makes a decision. Sorry.
That's right.
Misconstrued your question.
That's all right. In that case, Mr. Chair, I'll move that ordinance 2023-21, that includes both option A and option B, be recommended to the Board of Mayor and Aldermen for approval.
Proper motion to a second.
Second.
Let's do a roll call vote on that. Then Alderman Peterson, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Potts, how do you vote?
Yes.
Alderman Baggett, how do you vote?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes on that also. All right, let's go to item 10, report on the state comptroller's review of the city's 2022 annual report. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Mike, do you want to lead out since you're looking say left and right? Do you have,
Margaret is actually going to cover this
Margaret's
item
going to
for
lead
us.
out, okay.
Just want to make sure Christine didn't want to say anything. Good afternoon. As you know, we receive a letter after the state reviews our annual report. We did receive 2 notes regarding our FY22 annual report. One was regarding the pension plan disclosures. We will add in the FY23 annual report a note to the pension plan disclosures stating that the pension plan's fiduciary net position as a percentage of the total liability. So we will make that change. And the second one was regarding capital assets, and we will update our note in our annual report reflecting that the city does not capitalize the interest that is incurred during the construction period. So we'll make those clarifications.
All right. Any questions? Alderman Potts, any questions on that? If not, we'll go to monthly reports for May 2023.
I will give 3 highlights for these. The first one is, of course, local sales tax. We are 4.6% higher than this time, month over month than last year. So we're still holding strong with that. Gasoline tax is comparable to last year. We're at about 1% difference from the prior year. And then hotel motel, we are 19% higher than this time last year at the end of February. And we, of course, have 5 more months of revenue coming in.
Any questions? Any other comments as far as the monthly reports are concerned? Very good. Up everywhere. Do we have any other items to come before the committee? If we do not, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Proper motion to second.
Second.
All indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.